I didn't say a word when Shelley told me I could sleep in the garage. She didn't even glance up from her phone. Just waved a hand in the direction of the door that led past the laundry room and muttered, "Guest rooms taken. You can sleep in the garage, Grandma." Like I was luggage they hadn't figured out where to store yet. I nodded. Not because I agreed, just because I'd stopped arguing a long time ago. It was the way her voice curled at the edges with convenience. The way Greg kept scrolling through the TV menu like this was a normal Tuesday night, not the evening their 68-year-old mother was being shuffled to sleep beside power tools and paint cans. I carried the quilt myself, the same quilt I'd crocheted back in 1982, a burnt orange tulips on a field of oatmeal brown. It used to sit at the foot of the guest bed in our old house, the one James built with his hands and I filled with casseroles and lullabies. That house is gone now. Sold when Greg said it made more sense for me to live with them. "It's a win-win, Mom," he'd said, smiling like he was doing me a favor. "You'll have help if you need it, and we'll use the money to finish the basement. More space for the kids." Funny how I never saw that basement. The garage was dark when I stepped in, though the motion light flickered on like an afterthought. Boxes stacked high, a folded treadmill draped in old coats, and the metallic tang of gasoline hanging in the air. They'd set up a folding cot near the far wall, between a plastic bin labeled Halloween and a rusty lawnmower. No pillow, just the cot and a scratchy wool blanket. I spread the orange quilt gently over the top, my hands slow from arthritis but still steady. I sat down, listening to the aluminum walls settle in the cold. My breath puffed white in the air. My knees ached. The concrete was unforgiving. Inside the house, just a few yards away, I could hear the clinking of glasses, laughter, the scrape of silverware against china. Shelley's laugh, sharp and practiced. Greg's deeper one, loosening with each sip of wine. Someone must have been visiting, the kind of visitor important enough to get the actual guest room. I never asked who. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay still, counting each breath, one for every year since James died. 22 in all, each one thinner than the last. "You wouldn't have let this happen," I whispered to the dark. My voice cracked in the cold. The silence answered, and still, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying felt like a request, and I'd stopped asking. I watched my breath fog in the beam of the garage light and thought about how easily it all had happened, how gradually the shift had taken place, from "you're just staying until you heal" to "she's basically part of the furniture." From the living room to the corner chair, then the den. And now here, the garage, the place they stored old bikes and forgotten decorations, and now me. At 4:15 in the morning, I sat up. My knees popped, my back screamed, but my mind, for the first time in years, was clear. I pulled on my thickest sweater, one James used to call my pumpkin armor, and packed a small canvas bag, just the essentials. My wallet, a toothbrush, the napkin I'd written my account numbers on, tucked inside an old envelope marked for emergencies. This was an emergency. I opened the garage door slowly. It groaned like it knew. The night air hit my face like glass. Stars stared down like silent witnesses. I stepped out, the driveway slick with frost, the porch light still flickering. I didn't look back, not once. That house, with its smart thermostat and sectional couch and voice-controlled kitchen, I'd paid for half of it. Greg called it a consolidation of family assets. I called it something else, once, but I don't anymore. I walked to the corner bus station with the cold gnawing at my knees and the quilt rolled tight beneath my arm. I moved slow, but I moved forward. And when the woman behind the counter saw me, a sweater fraying at the cuffs, lips pale from wind, no coat, no scarf, she didn't ask the wrong questions. "You okay, ma'am?" I nodded once. "Just leaving before they lock me in the garage again." She didn't laugh, just slid the ticket across the counter like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Destination, first bus out." I didn't care where it went, as long as it wasn't back there. The bus smelled like stale coffee and old pine cleaner. The heat stuttered through the vents, weak but persistent. I sat by the window, pressed my hand to the glass, and watched the town roll by. Past the bakery where I used to buy Greg's cinnamon rolls, past the library where I taught reading on Thursday afternoons, past the little park where he once kicked his first soccer ball and waved at me through the chain-link fence, places I used to belong. Now, I was just a shadow walking through memories, and yet, something stirred in me, not bitterness. Not even grief, just clarity. I wasn't going back. The garage was cold. But that morning, I was finally awake. It started with the thermostat. A week after I moved in, after the fall, the cast, and the long talk about what makes the most sense, I reached out to warm the house just a notch. My wrist still throbbed at night, and the chill in the hallway seeped through the plaster. The screen blinked, then flashed red. Locked. Admin access only. Shelley, I called softly. The thermostat won't let me adjust it. Do you know the code? From the kitchen came the sound of chopping, quick and rhythmic. She didn't look up. Oh, yeah. We keep it locked. Greg says it messes with the energy settings. Just throw on another sweater if you're cold. I had 2 sweaters on already. Still, I smiled and thanked her. Of course, I said, even as my bones ached. That was the first moment I knew I wasn't home. I was housed. They'd given me the guest room then. Still had the bed made, the old nightstand Greg's grandmother once used. Shelley even put a lavender sachet on the pillow. To help you sleep, she said with that practiced warmth, the kind that never quite touched her eyes. I told myself it was kindness, but it wasn't long before the guest room became Shelley's new Zoom space. The desk arrived on a Tuesday, the rolling chair on Thursday, and by Friday, my quilt was folded neatly in a box at the foot of the stairs. We set up a cozy little corner for you downstairs, she said, voice light, already leading the way to the den. The futon creaked when I sat. No windows. One overhead light that flickered every so often. The walls smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner and something damp. Just until I'm done with the quarter, Shelley added, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Then we'll figure something more permanent. I nodded, always nodding. What else was there to do? I was a guest in a life I'd helped fund. They never asked me to stay, not really. But once I was there, it became assumed, quietly, without malice, just like fog rolling in, a subtle, soft, and suddenly everywhere. I tried to make myself small, stayed out of the way during Greg's conference calls, learned to keep my footsteps light when the kids were napping, made dinners without spices because the smells linger, linger, like something unwelcome. One evening, Shelley and Greg were planning a movie night for the kids. Popcorn, pillows, blankets on the living room floor. I lingered near the doorway. Not out of longing, I told myself, but just passing through. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Is Grandma gonna watch too? Shelley's voice was quick, too quick. Grandma's probably tired. She can rest in the den. Greg didn't correct her, just nodded like it made sense. I nodded too, like my presence had been a suggestion easily edited out. Later that night, from the den, I heard them laughing. The movie's dialogue echoed faintly under their joy. I sat still, knitting a row I'd already finished twice. My hands moved, but my eyes stayed on the ceiling. I wasn't angry, not then, just a broken bar misfit. One afternoon, Greg needed to borrow my car. Just for a quick errand, he said, already taking the keys. Thanks, Mom. When he returned, the gas tank was nearly empty, and the seat was moved all the way back. He handed me the keys without a word about either. I said thank you. That night, I couldn't find my checkbook. I kept it in the side pocket of my purse I always had, but it was gone. 3 days later, it turned up in the laundry room drawer. Must have gotten misplaced, Shelley said, smiling too brightly. It didn't feel misplaced. It felt moved. I didn't say anything, just placed it back in my bag and tucked that bag under my pillow for safekeeping. Like a child with something precious in a house that didn't feel hers. One Sunday, I offered to make pancakes. Greg used to love my pancakes. He'd call them fluffy clouds, stack 5 high with syrup running down like rivers. Actually, Shelley said, we're doing protein smoothies now. Health goals, you know. She said it with a laugh, but there was no warmth, just dismissal, dressed in good intentions. I smiled and nodded. Of course. Later, I ate a piece of toast by the sink, buttered just the way I liked it, alone. It wasn't cruelty. That would have been easier. It was a mission, the slow erase. They didn't shout. They didn't push. They simply restructured the room around me and forgot to leave a seat. At night, I lay beneath the quilt I'd brought from the old house, the one James and I used to share on cold nights when the furnace wheezed. He would have said something about the thermostat, about the den, about the missing checkbook. "You don't have to shrink to be loved," he used to tell me. But it had been so long since anyone had said it out loud, I wasn't sure I believed it anymore. The next morning, I made tea, poured it into the blue mug with a chip in the rim, the one Greg made in kindergarten, and as the steam rose, I realized something quiet and awful. I wasn't living with family. I was staying with people who'd once been mine but had since rented out their kindness by the hour. It's strange how invisibility doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps in, quietly through hallway glances, closed doors, and half-finished sentences. One day you're part of the rhythm, and the next, you're background noise, present, but unnoticed, necessary, but never central. The mornings were the first to change. When I'd moved in, I used to make breakfast oatmeal with cinnamon, or scrambled eggs with a touch of cream, the way Greg liked as a boy. Emma would sit at the counter, feet swinging, asking why I put butter in the pan before it gets hot. Then, gradually, I stopped. Shelley began prepping smoothie packs on Sundays, labeled by day, sealed in plastic, stacked like frozen currency. "It's just easier," she said. "We're trying to streamline." I wasn't included in breakfast anymore. I still made tea, just 1 cup. The kitchen was too busy for kettles and mugs. Their blender roared to life at 6:40 sharp, loud and efficient. So I'd wait, standing in the narrow slice of sun that hit the pantry window, until they'd gone. Then I'd make my tea in silence. Lunch became crackers and a spoonful of peanut butter. Dinner, a broken bar dinner, was never asked about. Sometimes I ate the ends of whatever they cooked, a dry chicken, half a baked potato, the broccoli no one touched. Sometimes I made a grilled cheese in the den microwave. But more often, I didn't bother. I kept my dishes separate, not by rule, but by rhythm. Their plates had grown delicate gray ceramics, minimalist. Mine was a chipped blue one from our old house. Shelley had once called it dated. I kept it anyway. Some things you don't surrender. They stopped asking me to sit. At first, I'd drift into the dining room, hands wiped on my slacks, smiling, hopeful. Greg would say, "We're tight on chairs tonight," or Shelley would nod vaguely, "Too busy cutting someone's chicken." Eventually, I stopped drifting. I ate in the den, sometimes while knitting, sometimes while watching an old rerun, sound low, captions on. The kids rarely noticed. Emma used to crawl into my lap during storms, press her ear to my chest and say she could hear my story heart. Now she passed me in hallways like I was a lamp, polite, distant, lit only if needed. My name faded from their words. I became she more often than Grandma. She was napping. She already ate. She's probably tired. One Sunday afternoon, I heard Greg laugh from the patio. He was telling a story, something about college, a prank, or a dare. His friends were over. Voices filled the yard. Ice clinked in glasses. Music, low but cheerful. I wasn't invited out. I stood by the sliding glass door, fingers curled against the curtain, just far enough to be out of view. Someone said, "I didn't know your mom lived with you." Greg chuckled. "It's kind of temporary. She keeps to herself." Keeps to herself. Not lives here. Not helps with the kids. Not gave us the down payment. Just a broken bar. Keeps to herself. I stepped back from the curtain. There was no confrontation. No fight. Just that feeling like air escaping from a balloon you didn't know had been punctured. That evening, I found a box by the coat rack. Inside were my teacups, the floral ones with gold rims. James gave me the set for our 10th anniversary. They'd always lived in a glass cabinet. Now they were wrapped in newspaper. Shelley passed by, holding a tray of cookies. "Just decluttering a bit," she said. "You haven't used them in ages." I hadn't. But that wasn't the point. They weren't hers to box. I wanted to say that. My mouth even opened. But all that came out was, "Of course." In the den, I unpacked them quietly, one by one, held them in my lap like fragile bones, then wrapped them again, gently. I placed them under the futon, in the box where I now kept my old photos, my pension statements, and a single scarf that still smelled faintly of the cedar chest in our first home. There's a kind of ache that lives in stillness, not pain, just absence, a slow, polite forgetting. They used my name less and their tone more. I became something to step around, not toward. My stories were too long, my sweaters too loud, my presence too permanent. One evening, I asked Greg if he remembered the oak tree we planted in the old backyard. He blinked at me like I was speaking another language. "We planted it when you turned 10. I said softly. "You called it yours, said it would grow with you." He glanced at his phone. "Oh, yeah, I think I remember that." He didn't. That was the first night I didn't say goodnight. I just closed the den door and sat on the edge of the futon, hands folded. I wasn't sad, not exactly. I was a broken bar aware. There's a difference. Sadness wants something. Awareness accepts that what it wanted is no longer offered. I brushed my teeth in silence. The mirror above the sink was streaked. I hadn't been asked to clean in months, but I still did, on Wednesdays, just in case someone noticed. No one did. One night, I opened the drawer where they kept their batteries and found my reading glasses, the pair I'd misplaced 2 weeks earlier. I held them in my hand for a long time, staring at the lens, wondering how they ended up there. Then I slipped them into my sweater pocket, quietly, like a thief. I stopped watching TV. The remote disappeared one day and never came back. I assumed it had been tucked into a couch cushion, claimed by the cushions of their new life. I listened instead, to footsteps, to door clicks, to the sounds of a house that kept moving even when I stood still, and so I did what invisible people do. I folded laundry, watered plants, wrote names on napkins in case anyone needed a list later. I smiled when spoken to and stayed quiet otherwise. I became someone easy to ignore because that's what I was taught to be, and slowly, gently, I stopped expecting to be seen. The fall happened 3 winters ago. It was a Tuesday afternoon, brittle with wind and brittle with me. I'd stepped out to sweep the back steps, the ones that always iced over first day, when the broom slipped sideways and I went with it. A single clatter, one sharp crack, a sound I still hear in my sleep, softer now but etched in memory. I remember lying there, my wrist twisted oddly, my breath coming in white puffs, and thinking, so this is how it begins. Greg came rushing when I called. He looked genuinely concerned, panicked even. I remember that. It still matters. He drove me to urgent care, his hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, glancing at me every stoplight. "Why didn't you call someone?" he asked. "Didn't want to bother anyone," I replied, wincing as the car turned. Shelley was waiting at the clinic, coat unzipped, scarf lopsided like she'd rushed. She held my good hand as the doctor explained the fracture, the cast, the recovery timeline. 6 to 8 weeks, he said. Shelley's face softened. "You'll stay with us?" "It's settled," I protested, half-heartedly. "I'll manage. I just need help the first few days." Greg shook his head. "You're not going home alone. Not in this weather. We've got the guest room." "It's only for a little while." "Only for a little while." I moved in that Friday. They made the bed with fresh sheets. Emma left a drawing on the pillow, a rainbow and a stick figure labeled Grandma. Greg carried in my overnight bag and Shelley stocked the bathroom with rose-scented soap. And for a while, it felt good. Not just safe. Wanted. I'd make toast in the mornings, slow with one hand. Shelley helped me with buttons. Greg brought home heat packs. Even the kids lingered longer when I read stories, like my presence had a new purpose again. One evening, after dinner, we played a board game. I don't remember which one, something with plastic pieces and too many rules. I lost, of course, but the sound of Emma's laugh, a high and unburdened day, made it worth it. Greg poured me a small glass of wine, his hand warm as he passed it. "To healing," he said. I toasted back, "and to being surrounded." That was the last time I felt held by family, not managed by them. I remember the turning point too. It came quietly. My cast was off by February. I was driving again by March. By April, I started saying things like, "Once I'm back on my feet, "I'll head home." Greg would nod, distracted. Shelley would say, "There's no rush," and slowly, my things migrated: a drawer in the bathroom, a cardigan in the laundry, my knitting basket by the couch. None of it spoken aloud. No one asked me to stay longer. No one offered a timeline. They just never brought up the idea of me leaving. And still sore, still grateful I didn't push it. I told myself it was temporary, but even the word began to soften. Spring passed, then summer. Emma started school. The rhythm of their house became the rhythm of mine. I cooked, occasionally tidied, folded laundry that wasn't mine. By the first Christmas, I was part of the household. I sat on the far end of the table, watching Shelley's parents laugh and pour wine. Someone handed me a paper crown from a cracker. I smiled, wore it, pretended the hollowness I felt was just nostalgia. But even then, I knew I had become less of a guest and more of a fixture. The following spring, I stopped mentioning my house at all. It sat empty. The little cottage James and I had bought in A79, the one with the blue shutters he painted every 3 years. Without fail, Greg had offered to take it off my hands and rent it. "Easier for everyone," he said. So I signed the papers, transferred the deed. Family first, I told myself. The check I got in return went straight into their house. "Think of it as an investment in our future," Greg had said. And I did, for a while, until one rainy Sunday, I opened the hallway closet looking for an umbrella and found my winter coat wadded into a laundry basket beneath old shoes. The same coat I'd worn to James's funeral still smelled faintly of cedar and the cold of that January day. I held it in my hands, stared at it a long time, then quietly placed it back. It was just a coat, just a space, just another inch lost. Back in the early years, James and I hosted Sunday suppers: a roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds. Greg loved those. He'd sit on the counter while I made gravy, swinging his legs and humming whatever song was stuck in his head. "You smell like cookies," he once told me, burying his face in my neck. I held that memory for years like a charm. Now, he barely looked up when I entered the room. One night, I asked if he wanted seconds. He didn't answer, just nodded without meeting my eyes. And that was when I stopped offering, stopped asking, stopped interrupting. It was easier to be invisible than intrusive. But every now and then, I'd slip, mention the park where we used to picnic, or the library where I taught reading. I'd start to tell a story about James, or a memory of Greg as a boy. And someone, usually Shelley, would smile gently and say, "That was a long time ago," as if time cancelled the tenderness of it, as if remembering meant I hadn't adjusted. So I stopped telling stories, and the silence between us grew thick and polite. But in the quiet of the den, I still remembered. I remembered the girl who walked 10 blocks in the snow to deliver Christmas cookies to every neighbor, the young mother who stayed up 3 nights sewing a dinosaur costume by hand, the woman who held James's hand while he faded. I remembered the version of me that once filled rooms with warmth and pie and soft scoldings, who had a place at every table, who wasn't always in the background. And though they no longer saw her, I still did, which made what came next all the clearer. It was Greg's birthday, a Tuesday, gray and wind-stung, with leaves blowing sideways down the sidewalk. I remember because I stood at the bus stop earlier that morning, watching them scatter away, not because I needed the bus, but because I wanted to stretch my legs, clear my mind, pretend I had somewhere to go. Back at the house, I baked the cake, chocolate with cinnamon sugar, his favorite since he was 9. It was the one thing I'd kept doing, year after year, through his teens, college, even that rough winter after his divorce when he moved back in for 2 months. I'd bake, and he'd say, "Still got it, Mom," with his mouth full and eyes soft. I didn't ask permission to bake it this year, I just did it. The smell drifted through the house around 3 in the afternoon, warmth in the air for once, instead of cool essential oils or the sharp hiss of Lysol from Shelley's constant spritzing. I even lit a candle, just one. Shelley came down the stairs halfway through frosting. She paused at the edge of the kitchen, eyes on the cake, her lips pinched, then pressed. "Oh, a broken bar, you didn't have to do that," she said. "We've got a cake coming." "A cake?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. From that little place on Weller Street. With the fruit glaze and that almond flour base, gluten-free. We're trying to cut back on sugar. I nodded. Of course, I didn't know. She shrugged. Greg didn't mention it. I shook my head. He hadn't. Well, she said, her voice lighter. Maybe we'll save yours for later, or the kids. I think they have a bake sale coming up. She walked off, already pulling out her phone, thumbing through something. Probably the tracking info. The candle flickered behind me. I scraped the last of the frosting into the sink and rinsed the bowl. The water was too hot. My knuckles reddened. But I didn't adjust it. I just stood there, staring at the blue swirl of dish soap circling the drain. Later, when the front door opened and the kids screamed happy birthday, I smiled from the hallway. Not one of them looked up to find me. Greg laughed. Shelley kissed his cheek. Emma handed him a card she made at school, all glitter and stick figures. I waited, hovering just beyond the frame of the moment, like furniture out of place. I waited for him to ask if I'd join them. He didn't. The dining table had 6 chairs, all full. I sat in the den, the cake cooling on the futon beside me, still whole, still warm, untouched. They sang to him in the next room. I heard the candles blow out one clean breath. Applause. The click of a phone camera. I held my own candle in my hand, unlit. When I finally wrapped the cake, I used foil from the drawer marked Holiday Extras, the kind with snowflakes printed along the edges. I pressed it around the plate carefully, like it mattered. I placed it in the fridge behind a bag of kale and a row of probiotic smoothies. I didn't label it. No one would touch it anyway. Later that night, Greg passed me in the hallway. His shirt was wrinkled now, his smile a little worn from wine. He patted my shoulder, absently. "Thanks, Mom," he said, almost under his breath. "For what?" "I'm not sure." "The cake? The down payment? The years?" I smiled. "Of course." And then he was gone, turning into the bedroom with the soft click of the door behind him. That was the night I almost believed things would turn again. Just a few hours earlier, as the scent of chocolate filled the air, I had imagined Greg walking into the kitchen, eyes wide like he used to, saying, "No way, you made it." I imagined Emma asking for a corner piece, Greg cutting a thick slice and handing it to me first, a plate, a fork, a chair. I imagined being part of the warmth, not adjacent to it. But hope, real hope, doesn't last without air, and in that house, I had learned how to breathe less. At midnight, I crept into the kitchen. The cake was still there, unmoved. I took it out, removed the foil. It was dense with quiet. I sliced a small piece and ate it over the sink, the way I used to when the kids were babies and James worked night shifts. One hand on the counter, one on the plate. The taste hadn't changed, but I had. I washed the plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet, behind the stack no one used anymore. Then I returned to the den and lay down, still in my sweater. The quilt drawn high. I stared at the ceiling, where a crack ran across like a delicate vein. That was when I knew the difference between being forgotten and being unnecessary. Forgotten still holds a chance, a door ajar, but unnecessary is a closed hallway, lights off, no footprints. That night, I stopped leaving the hallway a light on. No one noticed. I didn't expect them to. I stopped waking to an alarm. There was nothing to wake for. I still got up. Of course, old habits do that. Even after the usefulness is gone, the body moves by memory. I'd rise while the house still slept, make tea in the half-dark, and listen to the wind against the windows. The tea kettle doesn't whistle anymore. The lid doesn't quite fit. I never fixed it. I don't remember the last time anyone asked if I slept well. The den grew colder that winter. The space heater Greg promised to bring down never appeared. I didn't ask again. One request already made me feel like an imposition. Two would make me a problem. So I wore 2 sweaters, and tucked the quilt tight around my knees. I stopped knitting. My hands couldn't manage the small loops anymore, and honestly, who would I knit for? Emma had outgrown cardigans. Greg's new dog would chew through a scarf in minutes. And Shelley, a broken bar. Shelley didn't even like the blanket I made for their guest bed. Said it clashed with the aesthetic. It now sat folded in the garage, between the leaf blower and a box of tangled Christmas lights. I used to be so many things: a mother, a teacher, a wife, a woman who could fix a stuck window with a butter knife and 2 paper towels. I ran errands with 2 toddlers and a sprained ankle, cooked 3-course meals with a baby on my hip, balanced bills and birthdays with the same notebook. Now, no one asked for anything but silence. "Just be available," Shelley had once said, referring to school pickups and piano practice. "We love having you here, but it's easier when things run smoothly." I had nodded, smiled. Available, like a utility, like Wi-Fi. They had my bank information, my medication schedule. They knew my weight, my blood type, my favorite brand of tea, but they didn't know the sound of my laugh anymore. I wasn't sure I did. The worst part isn't the loneliness, it's how you start to agree with it. You stop sitting in the living room, not because you're told not to, but because you assume you shouldn't. You stop wearing lipstick. You stop warming your meals. You start eating things cold out of the fridge, because the microwave makes too much noise. You stop saying goodnight. You stop saying your name. You become someone who waits for doors to open, for conversations to finish before entering a room, for a quiet moment when no one's watching to refill the toilet paper. You wait for someone to notice the waiting, and they don't. One day, I realized I hadn't spoken aloud in almost 36 hours. Not a sentence, not a single full thought, just a few murmurs to myself, half whispers like a fading radio station. My voice sounded strange when I did speak again, like an echo of someone else's. That evening, I opened the drawer by my bed and found the envelope I'd hidden weeks earlier. The one with the napkin inside. My accounts, the trust fund James and I had built. The last pieces of me still in my own name. I traced each word with my finger. The ink had started to smudge. A storm came through that night. I heard branches scraping the siding. The kids squealed upstairs, something about shadows on the wall. Greg calmed them. Shelley turned up the sound machine in their room. No one came to check the den. My window leaked. Just a slow drip. I put down a towel. I didn't sleep. Not from worry. From knowing. Knowing this was it. Not a phase. Not a rough patch. This was the shape of things now. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I was touched with intention, a real touch. Not a pat, not a guiding hand, but someone reaching for me because they wanted to, not because they had to. It had been years, maybe since the hospital, maybe longer, and in that silence, that heavy, airless silence, I felt something give, not break. Breaking is loud. This was quieter, final. It wasn't grief. Grief has weight and sharpness. This was erosion, like a shoreline disappearing grain by grain, tide by tide, and no one looking long enough to see the change. The next morning, I didn't make tea. I didn't pull back the quilt. I just lay still. I watched the light crawl across the floor like it was measuring how little space I took up. And I knew, if I disappeared that day, slipped out the door with nothing but a bag and a memory, and no one would notice until the dishwasher was full and the school pickup was missed. Even then, they might assume I'd simply gone quiet again, which I had, but not in the way they thought. It was a Tuesday. Again, there's something cruel about how change often begins on the most ordinary days. No storm clouds, no slammed doors, just sunlight filtering through dusty blinds and the sound of the washing machine starting its second cycle. I'd just finished folding a stack of hand towels that weren't mine. Shelley liked them stacked a certain way, stripes aligned, folded in thirds. I used to fold differently, a habit from the old linen closet in the house James built. But here, I adjusted, like I had with the thermostat, with the schedule, with the silence. I was putting the last towel away when I heard Emma ask, "When's Grandma leaving?" She was at the kitchen table, swinging her legs, coloring. The question came out soft, almost curious, not cruel, just a broken bar neutral. Shelley paused. "What do you mean, honey?" "I don't know," Emma said, shrugging. "She just a broken bar lives here, but she doesn't really do anything." The pencil scratched across paper. I stood still, one hand on the cabinet, the other holding the edge of my sweater. I could hear the fridge hum, the creak of the stool under Emma's feet. "She helps," Shelley replied eventually. "She's just tired a lot. Old people get tired." Old people, not grandma, not mom, just a broken bar category. And that's when it happened. Not anger, that had long since burned out. Not sadness, I'd already spent that. No, what came was something quieter, clearer. I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't useful enough, not because they were cruel, but because I had handed over my place, piece by piece, permission by permission. And they had taken it, not with malice, but with ease. Like someone clearing out an old drawer. I stood there for a long time, listening to the buzz of their lives moving around me. Am humming, Shelley tapping on her phone, Greg somewhere upstairs talking about metrics and deadlines. None of it needed me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel grief. I felt release. I walked back to the den, each step steady, each breath more certain. I sat on the edge of the futon, pulled the napkin list from the drawer. My name, my accounts, my rights. I read it slowly. This was mine. A thin slip of paper, smudged with old ink, folded so many times the edges had begun to feather. But it was mine. I didn't act yet. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't call a cab. I didn't book a ticket or leave a note. But I made a choice, a quiet one. This wasn't my home anymore. Not because they said so, but because they'd stopped seeing me in it. There's a difference between staying and being kept, between helping and being held, and I finally saw it. I smoothed the napkin flat, took a pen from the drawer, added one more line. I still exist. Then I folded it again and slid it back into the envelope. Outside, the mail truck passed. The world kept turning, but inside me, something shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but like a door unlocking after years of being stuck. Not open yet, but ready. I didn't announce it. There was no scene, no dramatic departure, no suitcase at the door. Just a quiet decision and a coat that still smelled faintly of cedar, pulled from the bottom of the hall closet where it had been wedged beneath a jumble of shoes. It was Greg's coat closet now, but the coat had been mine first. I slipped it on. Still fit, still warm. It was early, not quite dawn, when I left the house. The kind of cold that bites through fabric and finds the space between your shoulder blades. But I welcomed it. It woke something in me that hadn't stirred in years. I walked past the elementary school, past the pharmacy, past the little diner on the corner that smelled of bacon grease and old coffee. I kept walking until I reached the place I hadn't been in over a year, the public library. It was closed when I arrived, of course, but I stood in front of it, peering through the glass at the rows of books, the bulletin board pinned with community flyers, the front desk where I'd once volunteered every Thursday afternoon. Back then, I helped adults learn to read, sat with them in plastic chairs, sounding out syllables, watching their eyes light up when they finally caught the rhythm of a sentence. It was the only place I'd ever felt truly useful after James died. I stood there for a long time. I don't know what I expected. Maybe just to remember who I had been, who I still was, under the layers of silence and compliance and polite dismissal. When the lights flicked on inside, I nearly stepped back, but I didn't. The door opened at 8 o'clock sharp, and I walked in like I belonged, because I had, once. That mattered. The woman at the counter looked up, kind eyes behind thick glasses. "Can I help you?" I smiled. "I'm not sure, but I think I'm ready to help someone." She tilted her head. "Are you asking about volunteering?" I nodded. "If you take older hands and older stories." She smiled back. "We always do." She gave me a clipboard, a schedule, a sheet of roles and open shifts. I took a seat by the window, filled it out slowly, every letter neat, deliberate, like I was writing my name back into the world. When I finished, I sat still for a moment, watching the people come and go. There was a girl in a bright scarf, balancing a coffee and a stack of mystery novels, a young father with a squirming toddler on his hip, an elderly man pushing a walker, nodding politely to everyone he passed. I was one of them. Again, I walked to the shelves, ran my fingers along the spines, paused in the large print section, found a title I remembered reading aloud to a woman named Dolores. She had cried at the end, not because the story was sad, but because she had read it. Every word. That was power, shared quietly. I checked out the book. Just one. The woman at the counter scanned my new card and handed it back with a smile. "See you Thursday?" she asked. "Yes." I said. You will. I left the library and walked to the diner. Same cracked leather booths. Same faded specials board. Same cook in the back with the radio turned too loud. I sat at the counter, ordered pancakes and coffee black, no sugar. When the plate came, I pulled out a napkin and began to write a new list, not of accounts or passwords or trust funds, but of things I still wanted, things I hadn't said out loud in years. Learn to bake again. For me. Visit the botanical garden in spring. Buy new yarn, bright colors. Read aloud every Thursday. Get my own mailbox again. The list wasn't long, not yet, but it was mine. I folded it and tucked it in the same envelope as the first napkin. A growing archive, not of what was taken but of what remained. The waitress refilled my coffee. Big plans? She asked, nodding to my pen. I smiled, just remembering a few things. That afternoon, back in the den, I rearranged the quilt on the futon, not out of habit, out of intention. Then I took down the small photo of James from the drawer, the one that used to sit on our bedside table before it was boxed away, and placed it on the makeshift shelf above the heater. He looked right at home, and so did I. No one noticed that day. No one asked where I'd gone, but I didn't care, because for the first time in years, I had gone somewhere and brought a part of myself back, and I wasn't going to lose her again. I woke before the house. As always, the sky was still more night than morning, bruised blue and gray. The streetlights blinked softly outside, casting long shadows through the blinds. Everything was still, the kind of stillness that begs for a decision, and I had already made mine. I folded the orange quilt neatly. It took time, my fingers slower now. Stiff in the morning, but I made sure each edge aligned. I smoothed the last corner like I used to when tucking in Greg's bed, years ago, back when his feet didn't yet reach the end of the mattress. The room looked cleaner than it ever had, not because it had changed, but because I had. I saw it now not as a home, but a waiting room where nothing had ever really arrived. I opened the drawer and removed the envelope. Inside, 2 napkins, one with my name and numbers, one with my wants. I added a third. It was blank, just a soft, folded square, a symbol, a space cleared. I left it on the futon, beneath the quilt. Then I stood, wrapped my coat around me, the cedar-scented one they thought was gone, and picked up my canvas bag. It didn't hold much: the library book, a spare sweater, my medications, and the envelope. Nothing else was mine. I paused once in the hallway. The house murmured around me, the tick of the thermostat, the soft hum of the fridge, the creak of a pipe. Familiar, yes, but no longer sacred. I passed the kitchen. A sink full of dishes from the night before. Shelley always said she'd load them in the morning. I used to clean them quietly after she went to bed. Not today. I left the dish towel folded on the counter. In the living room, the dog raised its head but didn't bark, just blinked, then curled back into the blanket. I almost reached out to pet him, but stopped. Some gestures don't need to be made twice. At the front door, I hesitated, not because I doubted myself, but because I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry, not anymore. There was no bitterness in my throat, no tears in my eyes, just breath, slow and clear. I unlocked the door, stepped out into the dawn. No one stirred behind me. I walked down the driveway I had helped them pay for. My shoes crunched softly on the frosted pavement. I looked once, at the garage, dark and closed. That's when I remembered my very first night there, at the cot, the paint cans, the sharp cold air. I remembered thinking, you wouldn't have let this happen, James. And now, finally, I didn't let it happen either. At the end of the street, I turned right. The bus stop came into view. Same cracked bench, same tilted sign. The woman at the counter might recognize me, or not. It didn't matter, because I wasn't leaving to be noticed. I was leaving to live. At 6:02, the bus pulled up. I stepped on, flashed the card I'd bought 2 days earlier, and took a seat by the window. Outside, the sun began to rise. Soft light spilled across the sidewalk, across the branches, across the path I had taken, not in rage, but in reclamation. Back in the den, beneath the quilt, on that plain little napkin, I had written nothing, and yet, it said everything. Not a resignation, but a release. The bus hummed softly beneath me, steady and low. The city rolled past in gray and gold, early morning light catching the frost on car roofs, turning everything to quiet fire. No one spoke. A few nodded off. One woman clutched a paper bag of groceries, its top crinkled and damp from the cold. I watched the streets slip by, not with grief, but with clarity. I had nothing to rush toward. No grand destination. Just a list in my pocket, 2 napkins and a folded dream, and the unfamiliar sense that I belonged to myself again. At the diner, the same waitress poured my coffee. "You again," she said with a warm glance. "You're becoming a regular." I smiled. Maybe I already am. I sat in the corner booth. Not hidden, not out of the way. The sun touched the edge of the table, warm on my hands. I unfolded the napkin list. The one with the wants. A second library branch was listed there. A senior center with open poetry readings. A bakery that gave discounts to women over 65. A place with orange yarn in the window and 2 chairs in the back for drop-in knitters. I circled one, then pulled out the other napkin at the one with the numbers, the names, the keys to my future. I added a line at the bottom. Forward all mail to P.O. Box 117, Silver Hollow. It was mine now. A place, even if small, even if borrowed. I took a bite of my toast and looked out the window. No one knew where I was. And for the first time in a long, long time, that didn't mean I was lost. It meant I had space. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want to call anyone or send a pointed letter. I didn't want revenge or confrontation. What I wanted was this: quiet. Bread toasted just right. The sound of a spoon in a ceramic mug. The soft scratch of a pen moving across paper as I started a new page. I don't know what Greg and Shelley thought when they woke up and found the den empty. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they assumed I was on a walk. Maybe they noticed the envelope. Or maybe they just assumed I'd gone quietly because that's what I'd always done. Maybe someday, they'll realize silence was never consent, that shrinking was never agreement, that presence isn't a guarantee, it's a gift. I don't wish them harm. I wish them understanding, and maybe, if they ever find their way to that blank napkin, they'll feel what I felt writing it, the moment you let go, not in anger, but in truth. I paid for their house. I raised their child. I folded myself into corners so they could have more space. And I don't regret loving them. But I won't disappear to be loved. I choose space. I choose breath. I choose mornings like this, a warm light, buttered toast, and my name, whispered back to me by the woman I had nearly forgotten. I exist. Not because they say so, but because I never stop being real.